The glass atrium of the shopping plaza shimmered with late afternoon light, its polished floors reflecting hurried footsteps. Elijah Kane, the CEO whose name carried weight across boardrooms and headlines, moved with his usual unshakable poise, until he didn't. He stopped mid-step. Near the fountain, a little girl twirled, laughter spilling into the air like music. But it wasn't her laughter that struck him. It was the faint scar above her brow, shaped like a crescent. A scar he knew too well. His hand instinctively brushed his own temple where the same mark rested, a reminder from childhood. For a moment, the noise of the plaza dissolved. His chest tightened, and the carefully constructed armor of power slipped. 6 years. 6 years since that night he tried so hard to bury. Elijah's voice barely rose above a whisper, trembling with a question he wasn't ready to face. Is she mine? By daylight, Elijah Kane was more than a man. He was a headline, a brand, an empire in motion. His face, sharp and assured, appeared in glossy magazines and financial networks. They called him untouchable. His empire stretched from skyscraper glass to sprawling estates, every deal signed with his quiet, surgical precision. In boardrooms, silence followed him like a shadow. Executives feared his disapproval more than market crashes. Investors trusted his instincts as though they were prophecy. And Elijah played the part flawlessly, impeccable suits, measured words, a gaze that cut through excuses. To the world, he was the portrait of control, a man who needed nothing and no one. But when the conference lights dimmed and the handshakes ended, Elijah returned each night to a penthouse that echoed with its own emptiness. Vast windows looked out over the city, but inside, the rooms felt more like glass cages than havens. The silence pressed against him, louder than applause, heavier than victory. He poured himself top-shelf whiskey he no longer tasted. He stood before mirrors, knotting ties with practiced indifference, yet behind his eyes there was always that flicker, the memory of a night he could neither erase nor forgive himself for. 6 years had passed, yet it was as if time had frozen at that moment, branding his conscience as permanently as the scar on his temple. He told himself he had done what was necessary, what was pragmatic. He told himself the world rewarded strength, not sentiment. And yet, every success was haunted by the shape of a loss he couldn't name aloud. The media praised his perfection, but he knew the truth. Perfection was a mask, and masks always cracked in private. His wealth insulated him from judgment, but it couldn't protect him from regret. He often stood by the window, watching families down below, fathers bending to tie shoes, mothers holding children's hands. He didn't envy their means, he envied their belonging. Somewhere deep within, the ruthless CEO wondered if he had bartered away the very thing that could not be bought. And then earlier today, in a crowded plaza, he had seen her. A little girl with a scar that mirrored his own, a scar that yanked the past into the present with brutal clarity. The possibility clawed at him, relentless. If she was his, then all the nights of silence, all the years of power, had been built on sand. Elijah Kane, the untouchable man, suddenly found himself trembling at the thought of a truth he might not be able to control. The ballroom had glowed with chandeliers and champagne, the air thick with laughter that was less about joy and more about dominance. Elijah Kane had attended countless galas, yet this one pressed against him like a mask too tight. Wealth paraded itself in sequined gowns and diamond cufflinks, each guest rehearsed in the art of looking down. That was when he saw her. Maya, she wasn't in satin or silk. Her dress was simple, borrowed perhaps, and her shoes looked scuffed beneath the marble lights. She had come as part of the staff of a community program the gala claimed to support. But she didn't blend in as they expected. She stood with quiet dignity, holding her glass of water as though it were a crown jewel. The whispers started quickly. "Did you see her shoes? Clearly doesn't belong here. Charity cases should know their place." Elijah had heard such cruelty before, but something about the way Maya's jaw tightened, the way her eyes flickered toward the exit as though calculating escape, unsettled him. when a group of young socialites accidentally spilled champagne across her dress and laughed. He moved before he could stop himself. "That's enough," his voice had cut through the music. The laughter stilled. He offered her his handkerchief, not an extravagant gesture, but one that silenced the room. Maya looked up at him, startled, defensive, then quietly grateful. For the rest of the evening, he found himself drawn to her, drawn to the quiet strength she carried, the way she did not bow beneath humiliation. She spoke of her daughter, then just a baby, and the endless hours she worked to keep a roof overhead. Her voice wasn't pleading, it was matter of fact, edged with pride. She had known hardship and wore it like armor. For Elijah, whose world was full of masks and manipulation, her honesty was disarming. By the time the gala's lights dimmed, and the noise of the crowd had given way to silence, they shared a moment neither of them had planned. In a quiet corner of the balcony, words fell away, replaced by something raw, connection, fragile and fleeting. But the world does not forgive such fractures in its order. By morning, whispers had turned to scandal. The CEO and the charity girl. Rumors poisoned truth, twisting dignity into mockery. Elijah's advisors warned him of reputational ruin. Investors threatened withdrawal. Maya was painted as an opportunist, a schemer. And Elijah, who had felt something real for the first time in years, chose silence. His pride, his empire, his fear of losing control outweighed his instinct to defend her. She left quietly, taking her child with her, vowing never to need him, never to be humiliated again. He let her go. And in that letting go, something in him cracked. 6 years later, he still felt it. The memory wasn't gilded, it was jagged, searing. For the man the world called untouchable, this was the one night that touched him so deeply he could never fully heal. The neighborhood where Maya lived was nothing like the skyscrapers Elijah Kane ruled. Here, the buildings leaned into one another for support, paint peeling in quiet surrender, stairwells echoing with the chatter of families who measured wealth in laughter, not stocks. Yet for Maya, this modest apartment was both fortress and reminder, a fortress from the venom of the past and a reminder of all she had carried on her own. She sat at the small wooden table that doubled as dining surface and workspace, her hands moving quickly across fabric she was mending for a client. The whir of the old sewing machine filled the air, steady and practical. Bills were stacked neatly in a chipped porcelain dish, each one waiting its turn. Maya's back was straight, her movements efficient. Pride, not money, shaped the order of her home. "Mommy's look." The voice came like sunlight breaking through cloud. Leela stood in the doorway, clutching a drawing that had smeared colors across the paper in bold, clumsy joy. 6 years old, her curls tied back with a ribbon that had been mended twice already, she held the paper aloft as though it were a masterpiece. And to Maya, it was. Maya smiled, though faint lines at the corners of her eyes revealed how hard-won her joy was. "It's beautiful, Leela. What is it?" "It's us," Leela declared proudly. "You and me, and the house is bigger because one day we'll have a garden with flowers." Maya's throat tightened. She crouched down, brushing a stray curl from Leela's forehead, careful to avoid the small crescent-shaped scar above her brow. It was the one mark she could never explain to strangers without remembering him, without remembering that night. Children at school sometimes asked about the scar. Some said unkind things. "It looks like a cut." "Did you fall? Did your mom not watch you?" Leela had learned early that answers could be weapons, so she learned something most children shouldn't have to: silence. But silence didn't dim her spirit. At school, she was quick to share her crayons with the girl who forgot hers or to console the boy picked last in games. She had inherited her mother's dignity but wore it with a child's stubborn brightness. Teachers often said, "Leela has something about her, a kind of strength." Maya would smile, but inside she knew. Strength was not gifted, it was forged. Still, the world could be cruel in quieter ways. Mothers at the school gate whispered when they saw Maya's modest clothes. Invitations to birthday parties arrived late, if at all. Some families didn't want their children playing with the girl from that part of town. Maya absorbed it all silently, like rain against stone, but she never let Leela see. Instead, she filled their home with stories, not of wealth, but of worth. She told her daughter that kindness outlived riches, that honesty could not be bought, that dignity was the greatest inheritance. And every night, as she tucked Leela into bed, she whispered the same promise. "You are enough, always enough." There were days Maya wondered if she had done the right thing by keeping her distance from Elijah Kane. She never doubted his power or his ability to provide, but she doubted the cost. The world he lived in had crushed her once. She would not let it crush her daughter. And yet there were moments, when she watched Leela sleep, her tiny hand curled beneath her cheek, that Maya felt the sharp ache of truth. Her child was half of her, yes, but half of someone else too. Someone who had chosen silence. Someone whose shadow stretched longer than Maya wanted to admit. The scar above Leela's brow sometimes caught the light, pulling Maya into memories she tried to lock away. In those moments, she reminded herself fiercely, "He does not define us, we define ourselves." The little girl had begun to ask questions, though. Innocent ones, sharpened by curiosity. Why don't I have a daddy like the other kids? Why is it just us? Maya answered carefully, never bitter, never unkind. Families can look different, Leela. Ours is small, but it's strong. Still, she saw the way Leela's eyes lingered on fathers at school plays, the way her smile faltered when classmates made Father's Day cards. She carried that pain quietly, just as Maya had learned too. And so, mother and daughter lived in their humble corner of the city, two souls against the world. They were not wealthy, but their bond was rich. They were not powerful, but their love was fierce. Maya never imagined the past would find her again. Never imagined that the man she had walled out of her life, the man whose silence had cost her everything, would one day stand frozen in a plaza, staring at her daughter's scar, recognizing himself in it. For now, all Maya knew was this. Her daughter was safe, her daughter was loved, and no shadow from the past would be allowed to break what they had built. But shadows have a way of lengthening, and soon the past would come knocking. The late afternoon traffic pulsed through the city, horns bleating in frustration, the rhythm of footsteps blending with the hum of engines. At a busy intersection, the pedestrian light blinked red, holding back a cluster of people waiting to cross. Elijah Kane stood among them, though anyone who looked closely would have noticed how out of place he seemed. His tailored suit, his commanding height, his aura of practiced control, all of it contrasted sharply with the commuters shuffling beside him. Yet for once, Elijah wasn't aware of the impression he cast. His eyes were fixed on a single figure across the street. Maya. Time collapsed in on itself. She stood on the opposite curb, her hand resting protectively on the shoulder of a small girl, Leela, whose curls bounced as she shifted impatiently, waiting for the light to change. The crowd might as well have vanished. For Elijah, there was only them. His breath caught. The child's scar flashed in the sunlight as she tilted her head. The mark, his mark. The signal flicked green, and the crowd surged forward like a tide. Maya and Leela stepped onto the crosswalk. Elijah moved too, instinct overriding thought, his stride slower than usual, almost hesitant. Each step brought him closer, every heartbeat louder than the traffic around him. Halfway across, their eyes met. Maya's recognition was instant. Her body stiffened, her lips tightening into a line that held years of unspoken history. Her gaze was not one of surprise, it was one of warning. It said clearly, not here, not now, not ever. Elijah faltered. For a man who had commanded empires, a single look from her made him feel like an intruder. Leela, oblivious to the storm of silence between them, looked up at him with curiosity. Her eyes, wide and unguarded, studied his face. Children have an instinct for tension, and though she didn't understand it, she felt it. She tilted her head slightly, the same way Elijah used to when he was a boy, an unconscious echo that nearly undid him. The three of them reached the middle of the crosswalk at the same moment. The crowd pressed around, strangers brushing shoulders, but the air between them was taut, charged, as though the city itself had stopped to watch. "Mommy," Leela's small voice broke the silence, tugging gently at Maya's hand. Maya didn't answer. She tightened her grip, her other hand clutching the strap of her worn bag like a shield. Her eyes never left Elijah's. He opened his mouth, but no words came. What could he possibly say? Hello? After 6 years of silence, is she mine? Every phrase died before reaching his lips. The traffic light began its countdown. 10, 9, 8. The numbers blinked in crimson as if marking the seconds of this fragile, suspended moment. Maya pulled Leela closer, her movements sharp, deliberate. Without a word, she guided her daughter forward, past Elijah, refusing even a brush of shoulders. Her body was a wall, her silence louder than accusation. Elijah stood still in the middle of the crosswalk as the current of people carried them away. He turned slightly, watching as Maya's back stiffened against the weight of his gaze. As Leela glanced once more over her shoulder, curiosity flickering before she was swept along at her mother's side. The light blinked red again, halting him. He remained stranded on the asphalt, alone in the space they had just vacated. The roar of engines rose around him, but inside there was only the thundering echo of his own heart. He had faced down rivals, governments, markets collapsing in real time, but none of it compared to this. The look of a woman who had once trusted him, and the unspoken question lingering in a little girl's eyes. Was she his? And even if she was, did he deserve to know? The traffic surged forward. Elijah stayed rooted at the curb, his hands trembling in the pockets of a suit worth more than most people's yearly rent. Power meant nothing here. The past had crossed his path, and it had not slowed for him. The city had begun to dim into evening, neon signs flickering awake as street lamps hummed above. Elijah followed at a careful distance, his steps echoing against the pavement. Maya walked briskly, her hand clasping Leela's as though the little girl might vanish if she let go. Maya, Elijah finally said, his voice low, deliberate, more fragile than he had intended. She froze. For a moment she didn't turn. Her shoulders rose and stiffened, bracing against a storm only she could feel. Slowly she pivoted, her eyes locking on him with the force of 6 years' silence. "You don't get to say my name," she answered, calm but edged like glass. Leela looked between them, confusion flickering in her wide eyes. "Mommy, do you know him?" Maya forced a small smile down at her daughter. "An old acquaintance," she replied carefully, her tone clipped. Then to Elijah, "What do you want?" Elijah took a step closer, though not too close. His life had been measured in calculated risks, but nothing felt as dangerous as this distance between them. Just a moment, a chance to talk. "You had 6 years to talk," Maya cut back, her voice rising just enough to be heard over the noise of the street. "You said nothing then, why now?" The words landed like blows, and Elijah didn't deflect. He absorbed them. His silence back then was the wound she would never forgive. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly, though his voice trembled with something raw. "I should have." "No," she interrupted sharply. "Don't dress it in should have. You made your choice. You stood there and let them tear me apart. You let them decide what I was worth." Elijah's throat tightened. Memories of that night flashed like jagged glass. Her humiliation, his silence, the way she had looked at him with hope that he shattered by doing nothing. He had wealth, influence, the ability to crush the rumors in an instant, but instead he had chosen pride. "Maya, please." His tone broke in a way the boardroom never allowed. "Let me explain just once." Her jaw clenched. She turned slightly, shielding Leela with her body, though the little girl peeked curiously from behind her arm. "Elijah Kane," Maya said, deliberately using his full name like a wall. "You don't explain, you control, you buy, you silence, but you don't explain." He flinched. Her words were precise, cutting deeper than rage could. "Mama," Leela tugged at her sleeve, her young voice trembling with unease. "Why are you mad?" Maya crouched quickly, brushing her daughter's cheek with steady hands, softening her tone. "I'm not mad at you, sweetheart. Some people bring back hard memories, that's all." Leela looked up at Elijah again, studying his face. The curiosity in her gaze gnawed at him. He saw himself in that tilt of her head, the same defiance in the shape of her chin. It was like standing before a mirror he hadn't realized existed. Elijah forced himself to swallow the words burning inside him. Is she mine? Instead, he asked carefully, may I see you again? Both of you, just to talk, nothing more. Maya's laugh was brittle. You think you can just step back into my life because you suddenly remembered I exist? No, Elijah, we don't need your pity. And she doesn't need your empire hanging over her like a debt she never asked for. Her refusal should have ended it. It was final, clean, like the slam of a door, but Elijah's voice cracked before he could stop it. I'm not here out of pity. He hesitated, fighting to breathe against the weight in his chest. I saw her, and for the first time in years I felt something I can't ignore. Maya's eyes flashed. She is not your redemption project. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. The three of them stood on the corner of an ordinary street, yet the air vibrated with everything unsaid. Finally, Maya turned sharply, her decision carved in her posture. Stay away from us, Elijah. Whatever you think you feel, it's too late. She took Leela's hand and began walking, her steps clipped, determined. The little girl glanced back once more, her brow furrowed in innocent confusion, as though she were leaving behind a puzzle she didn't yet have words for. Elijah stood there, rooted to the pavement, his carefully built world shaking beneath him. He had expected resistance, anger even, but what he hadn't expected was the raw fear in Maya's eyes. Not fear of him, but fear of what his reappearance could cost her daughter. The past was no longer buried. It was alive, walking ahead of him with a scar above her brow. And as much as Maya wanted to lock him out, Elijah knew with absolute certainty he couldn't turn away again. Elijah Kane sat in the back of his town car, city lights blurring past, yet his gaze was fixed inward. He could not unsee the scar, small, crescent-shaped, sitting on the child's left temple in the exact place where his own skin still bore its faint mark from a childhood accident. It wasn't just resemblance, it was recognition. Pull the files, he ordered quietly to his assistant, Clara, the only one who dared walk the fine line between his commands and his humanity. Every public record on Maya Laurent from the last 7 years. Hospital entries, school applications, anything. Clara hesitated. She had seen him obsessed before, hostile takeovers, court battles, the hunt for advantage, but never with this trembling intensity. Sir, if you find what you think you're looking for, will it help you or break you? Her words lingered, softer than the hum of the engine. Elijah didn't answer. He couldn't, because every possible answer terrified him. At his penthouse that night, the glow of a dozen screens painted his face. Newspaper archives showed the charity gala where he and Maya had been photographed, her head turned, his hand resting protectively on her arm. Headlines at the time had focused only on the scandal. CEO defends struggling woman, rumors swirl. He had buried those clippings, but now they burned like evidence. Next came school photos. The little girl Leela stood with classmates, her smile tentative, her eyes luminous. Elijah leaned forward, the tilt of her chin, the shadow of his late mother in her expression. His chest tightened as though iron bands wrapped around it. Still, doubt clawed at him. His logical mind demanded proof. He tasked private investigators with tracing hospital records, birth dates, places. The data aligned too neatly, too close to that night 6 years ago. Clara returned with a manila envelope. Inside, a copy of Leela's birth certificate, father line blank. Elijah, Clara's voice was almost maternal now. You've spent your life controlling outcomes, but some truths won't be shaped by contracts or power. They shape you. Are you ready for that? He stared at the certificate until the ink blurred. Ready? He wasn't sure he had been ready for anything in his life, except power. But now, power felt useless against the possibility of love and guilt. Late at night, Elijah walked to the mirror in his private study. He rolled back his sleeve, exposing the faint scar on his temple. He whispered to his own reflection, "Is she mine?" The city below glittered like 1,000 indifferent stars, but Elijah Kane, the untouchable titan, felt something he hadn't allowed in years: fear. Not fear of loss or scandal, fear of hope. And with that fear came resolve. He would know the truth, whatever it cost. The cafe was nearly empty, the kind of place where silence had its own gravity. Maya sat stiffly across from Elijah, her arms folded protectively, as though shielding herself from the man she once trusted for a fleeting night. Leela was at school, thankfully, so there would be no curious eyes watching this collision of past and present. Elijah placed a single folder on the table between them. He didn't push it toward her, didn't demand she look. His voice carried none of the commanding edge the world associated with his name. Instead, it wavered, steady but raw. "I've spent weeks turning over every stone, Maya, every file, every record, but the truth doesn't live in paperwork." Her lips pressed into a line. "Then what are you here for, Elijah? To shame me again? To remind me of the night the world turned me into your scandal?" He flinched at her words. His own silence that night, his refusal to stand beside her when the tabloids sharpened their knives, had carved deeper wounds than he cared to admit. Slowly, deliberately, Elijah reached up and touched his left temple. He brushed back his hair to reveal the pale crescent scar, faint but permanent. His eyes locked on hers. "She has this, the same shape, the same place. Maya, tell me I'm wrong." Maya's breath caught. For the first time since he'd appeared back in her life, her facade cracked. She pressed trembling fingers to her lips as though holding back years of swallowed truths. She asked me once why she had it," Maya whispered, her voice breaking. "I told her it made her special, that it was a star she carried with her. I never wanted her to know it tied her to a man who couldn't even look back when I needed him most." Her eyes filled, but her gaze did not waver. "I never asked you for money, Elijah, never asked for recognition. All I wanted was dignity. The dignity you let them strip away when you turned your back." The words landed heavier than any lawsuit, any boardroom betrayal he had endured. Elijah's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to explain, but explanations felt like excuses in the face of her truth. "I wasn't brave enough then," he admitted, his voice a confession, not a defense. "I let pride choke me. I told myself walking away was protecting you when really it was protecting myself." Tears slipped down Maya's cheeks, though her posture remained unbroken. "And now, what do you want now? To claim her? To put her in your penthouse like a trophy of your redemption?" Elijah's eyes softened. "No, I just want to know her. To know if she laughs like I do or if she dreams bigger than either of us. To give her the choice to see me as more than a shadow." For the first time, silence between them was not hostility but exhaustion. The kind that comes after a storm, when the wreckage is finally visible. Maya lowered her gaze. "She's your daughter, Elijah, but whether you'll ever be her father, that's something only time and her heart can decide." Elijah swallowed hard. The truth was no triumph. It was a burden, a wound, and a fragile hope all at once. Elijah Kane had built empires with offers no one dared refuse. Deals sealed in glass towers, fortunes turned with the flick of his pen. Yet across the small dining table of Maya's modest apartment, his greatest offer felt suddenly powerless. "I can give her everything," he said carefully, his tailored suit seeming almost out of place among the faded wallpaper and second-hand furniture. "The best schools, private tutors, security, a future that would never know struggle. You don't have to fight anymore, Maya, let me." Maya raised a hand, sharp and steady, cutting through his pitch. "Stop." Her eyes burned with quiet fire. "Do you think I haven't heard those words before? That wealth is salvation, that dignity is negotiable. No, Elijah, she doesn't need your empire." She leaned forward, voice trembling but unbreakable. "She needs your heart." The words struck harder than any boardroom defeat. Elijah's throat tightened. For a man who had trained himself to never show weakness, he suddenly felt stripped bare. Maya continued, softer now but no less resolute. "Leela doesn't need to sit on a throne built on headlines and gossip. She needs a father who will sit in a school gym, surrounded by squeaky chairs and paper decorations, and clap until his hands hurt. She needs a man who will walk beside her on crowded sidewalks even when people whisper. Can you give her that? The silence that followed was heavier than marble. Elijah's instinct was to promise, to command the universe into granting him credibility. But he knew words meant little here. I can try, he said finally, but I'll have to learn from her from you. The test came sooner than expected. A week later, Leela's school held a play, an earnest, messy production where cardboard stars dangled from strings and children stumbled over their lines. Maya had told him she wouldn't stop him from coming, but she offered no guarantee of welcome. Elijah arrived in a simple coat, his presence stirring whispers among parents who recognized him. He ignored them. For once, the CEO who commanded boardrooms chose a seat in the back row like any other father, folding his towering presence into the crowd. When Leela stepped onto the stage, painted cheeks glowing under cheap spotlights, Elijah felt something he had never experienced even at his most celebrated victories: awe without ownership. She sang her part shyly, her gaze flicking to the audience. For a heartbeat, her eyes landed on him. Elijah smiled, not with power, but with reverence. She looked puzzled, then smiled back, small but radiant. Maya watched from the aisle, tears she didn't fight slipping free. After the play, Elijah didn't summon a car or duck away from the murmurs of gossiping parents. Instead, he walked out beside Maya and Leela, the cool evening air wrapping around them. A couple whispered his name. Someone snapped a photo. He let them. Leela skipped ahead, clutching her paper star prop. Mama, did you see me? Maya laughed through her tears. You were perfect. Elijah swallowed hard and added quietly, you shone brighter than all of them. Leela tilted her head, studying him curiously, then slipped her small hand into his. Not because she knew the whole truth yet, but because in that moment he felt safe to her. For Elijah Kane, feared titan of industry, it was the first time in 6 years that victory had felt like humility. And for Maya, it was the first sign that redemption was not in his empire, but in his willingness to be small. Time did not heal everything, but it began to stitch what pride had once torn apart. Elijah Kane, the man headlines still called untouchable, learned the fragile art of presence. Not in boardrooms, but in classrooms. Not in penthouses, but on park benches where laughter echoed louder than power. Maya remained cautious, her dignity always her compass. Yet as days became weeks, she saw something new in him. Not the CEO who had abandoned her in silence, but the man who stayed, quietly, humbly, willing to earn trust one small moment at a time. And Leela, innocent of the weight of their history, knew only this: that when she skipped between them on the walk home from school, her tiny hands held steady in theirs, she was safe. She was loved. The world might still whisper, speculate, and watch. But for her there was no scandal, no empire, no shadow of wealth or shame. There was only the warmth of two hands, joined by a bond stronger than pride. Elijah Kane had once built empires to be remembered. Now, he discovered the truest legacy was not his name carved in stone, but his heart reclaimed in family.